All right, so we are continuing our series on Luke and going chapter by chapter throughout it with our overall this kind of year and then some of looking at being an apprentice to Jesus and just what that means. And if you do not listen to the rest of my talk today, I'm going to give you the main point that I'm going to say right now, okay? Then you can just stop listening if you want. I recommend not doing that, but all right, here we go. Being an apprentice to Jesus means having humility before God and before others. So being an apprentice to Jesus means having humility before God and before others. So in Luke 14, there's a lot of different stories that are going on, but one of those stories is that Jesus is at a dinner, like a dinner party, and he is got this. He tells about a feast, right? And then he tells some other stories about this great feast. And we're going to first look at the verses 12 through 24, where he is talking about this parable of the great feast. And this is where we're going to look at humility towards God. So if you've read the chapter, which hopefully, most of us did read this chapter, you'll know that this man is preparing a great feast, and he's invited all of his guests and told them about this feast. And then he says, okay, everything's ready, come on over. And he's met with lots of different excuses. I didn't know if that was like the standard operating procedures of a feast. So I did kind of do a little bit of digging. And in biblical times, when guests were invited to a banquet, they were told the day of the banquet, okay, it is for sure going to be this Saturday. But they weren't really told the time of day that it would take place. If it was going to be a lunchtime thing, maybe an afternoon, maybe evening, maybe a little bit later. It kind of reminds me of a home repair guy. He says, I'm going to come fix your AC or your electricity or whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool, when are you going to be there? Anywhere between 8 to 5 p.m. Give me a... Okay, so I just need to be home the entire day. All right, great. Thank you. So the person who's hosting the banquet, they're going to send out invitations to everybody that they want to be there. And they begin making those preparations. Sometimes that can take weeks on weeks to be able to just, fatten up the calf, to make sure they have all of the different produce and everything put together. If they're decorating, if they put in a lot of work to put together this banquet. And in this parable, the guests do some really weird... at first, when I read this, I thought they were legit excuses. I was like, oh yeah, this guy bought some property. That makes sense. Or this guy bought some ox. that makes sense. He needs to, probably do something with that. Or this other guy, he's getting married. That's good for him. Those seem good, good excuses. But if you think about those excuses, when I read it a second time, these excuses suck. They're terrible excuses. I mean, who buys a field or property and doesn't see it first, right? To just make sure it's real or make sure that it's not just a desert when you thought you bought a forest, right? And then who buys oxen, much like buying a car, without seeing it first, right? You want to make sure that if you're buying a Camry, that you're still getting a Camry and not a bad car, a bicycle. And then the last one is the worst one. Who agrees to come to a function and is oh wait, I'm getting married that day? You knew you were doing that. You knew. So these excuses that the guests have, they reveal something about their heart. They didn't really want to come. They really had something better to do with their time. And there was an original intent that Jesus had with this message. The host of this banquet is God. The original guest that he invited, this was the Jewish people, right? This is God saying, you are my chosen people. Come to my banquet. Be in my presence. I have chosen you. And the Jewish people denying that and saying, no, we have something better to do. We have other things that we want to do. We want to be like the other nations. We want to do our own thing. And so the parable goes on, and the host says to his servant, get anybody. Fill up this house, get anybody and everybody out on the streets, fill up this place. And those people on the streets are the Gentiles. Jesus is showing here that the gospel, that relationship with God, that presence with God, is something that is now going to be for the Gentiles because of this denial that has happened. Right? The Jewish people have rejected Christ, and that has a significant impact. And we do see, later on the spread of Christianity and how it goes into across the Mediterranean, into Asia, into Europe, and now we're here in Texas and as Christians, and it's really a lot in due to the spread at that time. So God has invited us into his presence, but thinking about it, do we have something better to do? Do you feel like when God has invited you to be with you and invited you to be with him, that you have something better to do? We practiced the Sabbath this summer, right? Resting and being with God. And I'll be honest, we haven't been that great about it since summer ended. Like, we've been somewhat consistent with it. Sorry, Jam. Sorry, Leslie. Like, we're trying. But during that summer, right, we saw a lot of growth in our church of resting, connecting with God, and really looking forward to a time where we could be in his presence with others, with our community, but also just us and God, just hanging out and truly rejuvenating our life so that when we came into the rest of our weeks, we were energized, we were ready for it. And I really think that us as a church can look back to that and not think on those days that we really could have set aside, whether it's half the day, the whole day. I got something better to do, I like soccer. I want to watch some soccer. That sounds great. We really could stand to set aside some of these things and really connect with God. I lost my spot, which is standard practice for giving a sermon. So, humility towards God is not making excuses for a lack of time with him. It's not deciding, oh yeah, I need to take care of this thing or that thing. It really is taking the time to have with God, be with God, talk to God, read the Bible, and give him the praise, whatever that is, and put your mind on him. Adam, stop texting me. And also, I think a big part to think about it is that in our sin, Jesus didn't make an excuse, right? He died on the cross for us without making any kind of an excuse. He had the ultimate humility to die on a cross for our sins. And what he wants out of us is our time and to get to know us, to spend time with us. So again, humility towards God is not making excuses for a lack of time with him. It's being in his presence because we've been invited to be in his presence. So also in Luke 14, we have the beginning there of like 7 through 11 where Jesus is really teaching about humility. He's noticed that the dinner guests are all kind of fighting over this seat of honor and really wanting to be at the head of the table. And he gives them some really great advice. He says, when you're invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you has also been invited? The host will come and say, give this person your seat, and you will be embarrassed, and you will have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. Instead, take the lowest place at the foot of the table. Then when your host sees you, he will come and say, friend, we have a better place for you. Then you will be honored in front of all the other guests. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So I'm going to give a sports reference. So any of you guys that do not follow sports, understand sports, I'm so sorry. My favorite basketball player as a kid was Allen Iverson. All right, like this guy was good. And my parents are here right now. They're shaking their heads. They did not like that was my favorite player. It was kind of like pick anybody else, literally anybody else. But he was good. He was so good. He had this move called the crossover, and for our not sports people, I'll explain it. He was going this way, right? And then he went that way. And then sometimes he would go this way, and then he'd go that way, right? And he did it better than anybody. He even had the nickname of the answer, right? I mean, this guy was like, he's something. So he was my favorite player. He was so fun to watch, fancy moves, an elite scorer, and he was a bold personality. But there's a reason why my parents didn't really like me being a fan of him, because he was not a role model in any real way. But he has this amazing quote, and amazing in the wrong way. But I do think it gets at the point I'm trying to make. So he decided to kind of just skip practice, right? I don't need to be at practice. So he skipped practice because he didn't need it. And he was in a press conference once, and he got like fined by the team, or I don't remember exactly all the drama that and the consequences from it. But the press and the media were like, why are you skipping practice? What is what's going on there? And he's, practice. We're talking about practice. Not a game, but practice. And he thought it was ridiculous that we got to take practice so seriously. And it's like, you know how good I am? I'm the answer. I'm Allen Iverson. We're talking about practice. What is that? That's kind of all right. From my people who don't know sports, like that comes across pretty arrogant, right? Like you kind of see that this guy is not, I wouldn't want to be on his team. I loved watching him play. He was a lot of fun. But being on his team, he never did the thing that a basketball player really sets out to do as a professional, which is win an NBA championship. He made it so far. He made it to the finals to be able to play it, but he can never get across that line there. As good as he was, he still had to humble himself and be a part of that team and just show up to practice. So, how does this apply to me? Well, I am pretty good at basketball, so never mind. But after a long day's work and a tiring commute, there are moments when I simply just want to unwind, get in some comfy clothes, and do nothing. Maybe it's play video games, maybe it's just sit down and watch TV. But how does this appear to my wife if I want to just do that? Right, she's worked a long day, and she's been working from home in a quiet house or sometimes not quiet house, depending on our dogs and how they would decide to act that day. But how does that appear to her when finally her husband comes home and he does not connect at all, does not engage at all? And for those of you that maybe aren't married or maybe you have kids, think about the other people that you share life with. What is it like for them if you come home and they're excited to see you? And you're like, yeah. And you just go to your room or go do your other things, right? That doesn't show any kind of excitement there, putting in some of the work to have this connection, this relationship there. I want to look at Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 34. So I am so sorry we are not looking at Luke right now. Please forgive me. I promise this connects, though. So Mark chapter 6, 30 through 34. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. But many people recognized them and saw them leaving, and people from many towns ran ahead along the shore and got there ahead of them. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped up from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And it goes on to talk about the parable of feeding the 5,000 from there. But in this passage, we're seeing Jesus and his disciples weary. They're seeking a place of rest. They've just done a whole ministry tour, and they've done so much, they didn't even have time to eat. And when they finally get to a spot where they're like, okay, we can relax, we can chill, they're met with even more people. But instead of frustration, instead of Jesus saying, I need some me time, I need some alone time, he has compassion. I do think it's crucial for us as people to prioritize self-care and rest, right? But I think it's also equally important for us to extend compassion to others. And Jesus demonstrated the importance of both rest and compassion. He was seeking rest, and he does find that important for himself and for his disciples. But he knows that that rest will come. But right now there are some people that really need him and have sought him and looked out for him. The wedding yesterday, Becca and Joey's wedding, was awesome. And at some times it felt like it was a stand-up comedy performance with just how much laughing was going on. I was like, what is going on here? But it was really sweet as well. Ronnie shared a lot of great advice as he was officiating the wedding. And one of the things that he said that stuck with me was fight for last place. And I think this is great marriage advice, but I think it's also just great Christian living advice of fighting for last place and humbling ourselves to really lift others up. And here we see Jesus, he is seeking rest, but he's also willing to fight for last place, lift others up, let them benefit more than himself. We just moved into, in May, we moved into a new neighborhood. We bought a house, and it's like a new community and everything. It's really cool, and because it's a new build community, everybody's new in this neighborhood. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of set the thermostat, if you will, of what this neighborhood will be like, and allowing us to engage with our neighbors. How much are we going to engage with our neighbors? How involved are we going to be in their lives? I want to provide first an example of where I did not really humble myself. A friend of mine that lives in our community, we've gotten some time with them, and one Friday night, Hannah was out of town doing some work, and I kind of just had the place to myself. I was really looking forward to it. I was like, I've got video games, I've got NBA basketball, and also I can be able to just maybe work on my sermon a little bit in between like halftime or maybe commercial breaks or something like that. You guys can already imagine how much sermon prep I did. But my friend Cody, he texted me and said, hey, what are you up to tonight? And I was like, oh, shoot, is he wanting to hang out? I kind of had some, I was going to make a steak and cook it and everything. Like, that was going to be great. And I was like, I ended up just texting. I was like, sorry, man, I'm pretty exhausted today. I've got a lot, I just need a rest, and I just need to have some time for myself. But please, invite me next time you want to hang out. I'd love to hang out again. What is 1 hour of that evening that I could have given towards my friend Cody, right? I don't know what's going on. He's expecting a kid, right? He has a kid on the way, and maybe he had something going on in his life. I think he's fine. I checked in with him a little bit later, but what could I have actually given to him, and just humbling myself and humbling the time, right, that I think is so valuable that I need to have this me time of video games and basketball and all of this stuff, to just give some of that to hang out with Cody. He's a fun guy. We actually have a ton of similar interests. I could have played video games with him, right? But instead, I really just wanted this time for myself. But I was also thinking about, when I was prepping this sermon, at actual time I was prepping this sermon, of our other neighbor that lives right next to us. His name is Safe. And our tree, it's a new little tree that we have, and it did not really get staked properly in the ground. And so whenever this windy city that we live in now is doing its thing, our tree kind of looked like it was the leaning tower piece of this way, and then it was going this way. The whole thing looked like it was just about to fall into the ground. And so we needed to kind of get some new rope and tie it around it, put some stakes into the ground and everything to help kind of keep it stable. And I was like, I can do this by myself. I just need a hammer. And Safe has always been a guy that I can just ask for a tool, and he just happens to always have it. So I went across and asked him if he had a big hammer for driving in some stakes. And he's like, yeah, sure. He grabbed it, and he came outside with me, and he just started helping me put the stakes in the ground and keeping the tree steady. I definitely was going to need his help because there was no way I was going to actually do that by myself once we got started. But he did like all of the hard work. He was the one putting in the hammer to the ground, and he was tying all of the knots, because I can't tie a knot. I mean, my shoes come untied all the time. And he was putting in the work for this. And I kept telling him, like, Safe, like, I can, like, let me do it. Let me do it. You know, I can do this for you. He's like, no, that's all good. I interrupted his entire evening. I don't know what he had going on, but I know that he works a pretty physically demanding job, and he still just took his evening. It maybe took about 30 minutes of just kind of figuring out where does this tree actually is it straight here? Is it straight? No, okay. But he took that time to help me out, giving up his evening, and we just had a great time talking. We just had a great time talking about things as we were working on it. And I think that's a really great example of somebody fighting for last place and being a good neighbor as well. I want us to look inward at our own selves in this community. There are a lot of people that give in this community, but I think there's also a lot of people in our community that we could stand to give more. We look at our schedules, and we have this rigid structure of our day-to-day lives of when we get done with work or when we get done with classes, we go do this thing for ourselves. And where is there time to give more to people, right? How do we allocate our waking hours, and where could we find ample room for nurturing relationships? Do we prioritize deepening our marriages, extending a helping hand to friends in distress, or simply just being there for somebody around us? I think it's in these small, somewhat seemingly insignificant acts. Maybe that's lending an ear, extending a gesture of kindness, tidying up a shared workspace or living space with your roommates. Could be just offering your presence. In those moments, it's where we demonstrate our commitment to fostering connections and deep relationships with our community and with our friends. I do want to be very clear here, because I do think that there are some people in our community that give a lot in our community. And I'm in no way saying that we need to become unhealthy in our boundaries and be just running ourselves dry. But I do think that we can really take a look at ourselves in this energy bar, if you will, and really see how much can we give. It wouldn't be a sermon at Denton North Church without a focus axiom. And you guys have all heard this one, but you rarely grow when you're comfortable. And I think we could really make ourselves uncomfortable with some of the time that we've set aside for ourselves to give that towards others in our community or our neighbors or our classmates, whoever that might be. I think that's a really great sign of being humble and having humility for others. I want us to strive to cultivate a balance between self-care, but focusing so much on what Jesus had in Mark 6 of compassion, seeing people with a need and having compassion for them, looking first to them and not to, I'm so tired. Please, not another soul, get by me. So what does this look like for us to have humility? Was that a burp? That was awesome. That was a man's burp. What would it look like for us to have humility towards each other? In other words, what does it look like to be looking out for others' needs rather than our own, and trusting each other to look out for our own needs? The easiest example of this is in Acts 2, 42 through 47. So that's Acts 2, verses 42 through 47. And there it says, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared in everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. So my challenge to us as a community is to look at our own selves and think, where can we begin to reflect this community in Acts that is talked about in the early church, in this sense of having humility and being humble and giving to each other and sharing so that no one had a need unmet. So let's be a community that puts others' needs above our own. I'm going to pray, and worship team, you guys can come on up. God, you are so good, and that you came down, lived with us, lived among us, and taught us what it means to be humble. Show us and give us this week and on opportunities to be humble and to give to others and to see the needs of others around us. Let us not think about our own time and our own self, but think about and have compassion for others. We love you. Amen.